We've had 2 years of interruptions with COVID. And what really is making me crazy is we have, Premier Ford, and we have Minister Leckie, our education minister. They're on TV and they're saying to the education workers, look, guys, don't go on strike. These kids have had 2 terrible years. We want them in school. And then the health ministry is over here going, let's suspend these kids just because they can't find proof of vaccination.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News, bringing you yet another story of, you guessed it, state-sanctioned public health overreach. You see, individual health units all across the province have resumed their bullying and coercive tactics to gain parental compliance with vaccine record paper trails for school-aged children, which are actually being digitally consolidated under an e-health portal called Panorama. Panorama was developed to support the vision of a provincial immunization system where individuals, healthcare providers, and public health all have secure, real-time access to the same immunization information. And in Ontario, we have the Immunization of School Pupils Act, or the ISPA, which is meant to increase the protection of the health of children against designated diseases, which are described as diphtheria, measles, mumps, polio, rubella, tetanus, and any other disease prescribed by the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care. The Act does stipulate exceptions or exemptions. There are medical, conscious, or religious exemptions. And side note here, I have heard that health units will not give out these forms unless you complete their vaccine re-education sessions.
This is a source of information about immunizations. This video does not provide personalized medical advice. If you have specific questions that are not answered here, please talk to a doctor or nurse. This video was funded exclusively by Ontario's Ministry of Health. Vaccine Education Certificate. Parents who are considering a non-medical vaccine exemption under Ontario legislation need a vaccine education certificate. You can receive your certificate after completing the education session with your local health unit. It will take roughly 25 minutes to view this video. You will need to submit your statement of conscience or religious belief form and your vaccine education certificate to your local public health unit.
Under the ISPA, it is the duty of the parent to complete the prescribed program of immunization, and failure to do so makes them liable for a fine of up to $1,000, or the medical officer of health may require a person who operates a school, in other words, a principal, to suspend from attendance a pupil named in their order. And the suspension is set to be for 20 days, which sounds about right because under the Education Act, it appears that only a principal can legally suspend a student in Ontario. And the suspendable offenses are for actual harmful acts like threats of violence, drug use, bearing weapons, drug trafficking, vandalizing, swearing, etc. The longest term of suspension is that 20 days, which arguably is reserved for the most aggressive acts. Yet all across the province, individual health units are threatening to suspend students for missing paper trails related to the ISPA. In the case of London Middlesex Health Unit, in London alone, according to the CBC article, approximately 1,200 students have been suspended for outdated vaccine records, and an astronomical 45,000 letters have gone out threatening the same. Plus, look at this. They say in 2019, the health unit said 98% of 7-year-olds in the London area were vaccinated for the measles. This year, 51% have submitted proof of vaccination for the same, in case you're wondering how public health has tarnished its own reputation throughout the COVID hysteria. And joining me now is the grandparent of one of these recipients, who is going to share her family's experience thus far.
I'm Marion Swain, and I'm a grandma with 2 grandsons, 5 and 7. And approximately 2.5 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law texted me upset, telling me that her sons were going to be suspended on Wednesday, and I think it was a Monday. She texted me, and I was like, what on earth have they done? Like, have they broken windows at school? Like, I'm like in shock. And then she said, no, that these letters had gone out from Middlesex London Health Unit to parents requiring that they show proof of vaccination. And apparently these letters were sent out before Christmas, but my daughter-in-law's mailbox is 5 miles away. So you got to get in your car, you got to drive. So they don't get it every week. Sometimes they go 2 or 3 weeks. So then she got a call from the school. And so now she's trying to get the records. And because when the oldest one, who's 7, was going to a walk-in clinic doctor because they couldn't find a family doctor, that doctor kept moving and the clinics kept closing. And so she couldn't find records for the 7-year-old. She did manage to find them eventually for the 5-year-old.
And this goes back, we're discussing here the routine childhood immunizations that happen from birth until roughly 18 months of age. And so the story here is that your daughter-in-law didn't have access to a family doctor, which is not uncommon where we live with our apparent world-class healthcare system in Canada and specifically Ontario. And so she was taking her son, now 7, when he was a baby, to a walk-in clinic for his routine injections.
Yes, that's correct.
And then, so what happened to those records and why have they not followed his medical record?
So this is the big question. So my daughter called the Middlesex London Health Unit, and right away and said, "Hey, this is what's going on. I can't find the records." And they were no help at all. Like, they couldn't tell her where to go to find them. All they did was threaten to open a CAS case and suspend the boys for a month. That was their solution. Or she could bring them right on down and get the 7 vaccines redone, which potentially could cause harm because there's history of harm in our family from vaccination. And so
it also begs the question, if the child has already received these vaccines and there's just a missing paper trail somewhere along the line, is there any science to back up the fact that re-injecting them with this string of cocktails is safe and effective?
There is no proof. This nurse at Middlesex London Health Unit doesn't know family history, obviously doesn't have the medical history of the boys, and yet is saying, "Oh, these are safe, just come on down and get them again."
Right. And what warranted this threat with CAS, which is Child Protective Services? Is there, some sort of risk here to the children if they go on being vaccinated just without proper documentation?
Well, this is it, right? There was a CBC article posted, and Alex Summers, who's head of the medical health unit in London, basically said, "Oh, this is for safety. This is for safety." And I have learned recently that apparently if you go to get an exemption letter, which is the possibility, that in that there is a clause that says that you agree that by not getting vaccinating your son, you're causing harm to him and harm to others. And that's a huge, huge red flag right there.
Right. So, yeah. That religious and conscious affidavit is a legally binding document. And that's if you were seeking an exemption, and which could very well be, I suppose, something that your daughter-in-law does seek out eventually. But in this specific case, the child was vaccinated. It's just a matter of having those records and trying to track them down, which is, from what I gather from your story, proving to be quite futile. But how does a paper trail and a signature on some documents change that safety risk?
Exactly. It doesn't change it at all. And my daughter-in-law called Monty McNaughton's office to talk to him about what was going on. And the girl there was surprised to hear this was happening. And she contacted the Minister of Health, whose name evades me at the moment. She's new. And she referred my daughter-in-law, Amy, to the College of Physicians to try to help with this. And so my daughter-in-law did that, and she's still waiting. It's been 2 weeks. She's still waiting to hear back from him. I think he was going to try to track down the doctor or the clinics or the records. I'm not really quite sure what his part in it all was. And everybody has a different answer. Like, that particular girl said, "Oh, all you have to do is go to Middlesex London Health Centre, put in your OHIP card number, and everything's going to pop up." And I'm like, well, if that's the case, why didn't they just do it, right? But that didn't work. And then I think the nurse at my family doctor said, "Well, you can go somewhere else and that there's OHIP records. And so every time you go to a doctor, they have to put in a bill. That bill has a code. And so it might be like F4 is for tonsillitis or C7 is for whatever kind of infection. So I don't understand why the medical profession and these clinics can't somehow track this through the OHIP number. I don't see why it's on the parent to do this when they've done nothing wrong.
Right. And neither has the child, who's now facing a 20-day suspension, which is, by the time you go through 5 business days, Monday to Friday, that's a full month of school.
Yes. And it follows right on the heels of we've had 2 years of interruptions with COVID. And what really is making me crazy is we have, Premier Ford and we have Minister Leckie, our education minister. They're on TV and they're saying to the education workers, look, guys, don't go on strike. These kids have had 2 terrible years. We want them in school. And then the health ministry is over here going, let's suspend these kids just because they can't find proof of vaccination. So where's the continuity in that?
Let me remind the member opposite that children in this province should have rights too, and they should be in school in this province.
Relevant here is to point out that there's the Ministry of Education, and then there's also the Ministry of Health. And these are 2 very separate, different ministries. And so when did the 2 become so enmeshed and entwined that one could come into the other and use a child as a pawn to try to gain compliance for a paper trail by a parent under threats of the most egregious suspension timeline?
Exactly. Like I taught for 50 years. I've never seen a suspension that long for some very serious things in schools. So shocking. And then my daughter also approached the principal at the school, right? So this is Ministry of Education, right? Education Act. And the principal said, my hands are tied. I am being forced to do this by the Middlesex London Health Unit.
Interesting. Now, other than what you've already detailed, is there any other communications that have taken place with the health unit that you find concerning or have actually been helpful instead of just threatening and coercive?
Yes. After my daughter tried some things, she called back to the Middlesex London Health Unit and she had found the younger boy's records. And she talked to a different nurse there who was sympathetic, who said, look, I can tell that you're not an anti-vaxxer because you got your kid vaccinated and you're trying to find these records. And so we're going to give you time. I'm not going to suspend him because he was supposed to be suspended a week ago. We're not going to suspend him yet. We're going to postpone the suspension because we can see that you're trying. And
so when she was no longer assumed to be an anti-vaxxer, the tone sort of changed from the health unit.
Yes. And then it's interesting because just by coincidence, I ran into another parent, right? Because I'm looking to sell a house and he was looking to help sell the house. And he actually goes to the same school as my grandkids. And so he was saying he got his letter before Christmas and here, you're trying to have fun with your family and friends and get presents ready and get ready for Christmas. And instead they got the letter and they're scrambling, trying to find the records because they don't want their kid to be suspended. And their next door neighbor was in the same boat. They found their records and they submitted them, but they were a day late. And guess what? The daughter was suspended for a week anyway, because they said it takes a week to process the information. So that poor kid was suspended for a week. Parent had to take time off for a week, even though they submitted the proof of vaccination because it was a day late. They lost a week. My daughter-in-law at this point, the fellow from the College of Physicians, has promised to contact her this week. So we're hopeful. We're hopeful that he can help there. And otherwise, I've contacted a lawyer because I think it's very important that this is done right and that my daughter-in-law doesn't somehow, get herself in a position by signing something that they can come back later and say, well, you said that, you're responsible if anything happens to your son or the other kids, right? So the plan is, wait for that College of Physicians guy, see what happens, talking to a lawyer, trying to keep putting pressure on politicians, and honestly, don't know what else to do at this point.
The way publicly funded schools are conducting themselves is becoming increasingly worrisome to many parents, and the infiltration of radical gender ideology and sexual grooming is no different. It's why we started a campaign at stopclassroomgrooming.com to urge Education Minister Stephen Lecce to investigate this gross display of perversion infiltrating our schools. Find out more, sign our petition, and send a form email to Minister Lecce at stopclassroomgrooming.com.